Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NCUST Review, What Great Schools Do. This podcast is designed to inform educators, policymakers, and school communities about the research-based practices, policies, and procedures that make great schools, well, simply put, great. I'm your host, Dr. Deborah McLaren, Executive Coach for NCUST, and today I'm thrilled to have as our guest Dr. Vincent Matthews. Welcome, Dr. Matthews.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So the first question that I ask everyone that is a guest on this podcast is, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in the work for NCUST.
Okay, my name is Vincent Matthews. Born and raised in San Francisco. I went to public schools in San Francisco, then graduated, went to San Francisco State. I wanted to become a teacher, became a teacher. I taught for 5 years and then became a principal at a number of schools, different schools for 15 years at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school level. And then I started my district office journey and became an assistant to the superintendent, and then became superintendent of Oakland Unified. I was actually under state administration, but superintendent there. After 3 years, became superintendent in San Jose Unified. I was there for 6 years, and then I went to Inglewood Unified. I was there for a couple of years. Once again, that was under state administration, which means you're appointed by the head of the public instruction for California, the state superintendent. And finally, after 2 years in Inglewood, I went back to where I was born and raised, where I originally started school, San Francisco, and became superintendent there. I was there for my last 5 years before retiring in 2022. And my last couple of years, I became acquainted with NCUST work. I thought it was what I had been looking for all of my career. I'm sad I only found it at the very end. But the practices, those best practices that good schools or great schools are able to do with all students and all student groups, brought them into NCUST, into San Francisco. In my last few years, partnered with NCUST, and now I'm excited to be associated with this work and assisting schools to move forward, especially for low-income kids of color who have not had the opportunities or chances that they should have had.
Wow. As I'm sitting here hearing your work history, it sort of sounds like my latest travel itinerary. You've been serving all over the place. This is awesome. And so on that line about finding your purpose or finding what you really thought you wanted to do in education, I know that a lot of the work that NCUST is founded on is equity and excellence. What comes to your mind when you think of equity and excellence regarding your role in NCUST?
When I think of those two words, equity and excellence, it really is about all students getting the skills that they need to succeed in the 21st century. And when I say all students, I mean each and every student. So often people say all, and then they will just have a number that is the average. And let's say the average of a school district is, 75% of our students are proficient, meaning they're on grade level. When I say all, I mean each and every. That means not only that average, but it also means equity and excellence means we're succeeding for each and every group. My background is really that story where I happen to have a mother who said over and over, you are going to go to college. And when you tell a student that over and over, it's amazing what that can do for a young person. So I knew that in my heart that that's what was going to happen. But then she also had to come in and interject. She had to come into the school and make sure I was in college going courses, which I was not. So I happen to have that mother who pushed herself in to say, you will educate this young man and make sure he has the skills that he needs to live a successful life. Not every student has that. So if that's not in place, it really is incumbent upon us inside of the system to make that happen for each and every student and for all student groups. And the work of NCUST, I believe, it actually works to assist principals and assist school teams and district offices in understanding what those skills look like, and then more importantly, how to make sure it's happening in all of their schools, not just a certain subset of schools.
Yeah, when I think about your story, I think I too had a mom and a dad who, both of them, there was never any question in our house that we were going to college. We weren't even asked if we wanted to go to college. We were basically, that was automatic. It was, you will go to college, and they put aside a certain amount of money to make sure. My father, he took out bonds, savings bonds or something along that line, so that we could go not only to college, but when I got ready to go to college, we could go pretty much anywhere we wanted, which is, when I look back at that, I think that's pretty amazing. You talked about equity, and you talked about the importance of equity being every student getting what they need. And I love how you talked about, we have these averages, and it made me think of a teacher I had one time that our goal at the school that I served as a principal of, we had a goal of 85% of the students would be proficient and blah, blah, blah. And this teacher, who was a fabulous teacher, came in my office when we got the results, and she said, "I'm not satisfied with this." And I said, "Huh? You got 85% of your kids proficient?" She says, "Yes, but there's 15% that I didn't." Right. And that taught me something really powerful, and that is, yes, 85% is a great goal, but you still have 15%. What are you going to do to make sure you serve those children so that they are prepared and they have what we already have, and that's a job, and we have an education. So thank you for that.
Yeah, can I just add, I just want to add on that. And typically those 15% or 20% or whatever that group that isn't, typically they are Black and brown, low income, are limited English speaking. And so that group is a group that has been marginalized by our system. And the sad fact is that it's actually been normalized or expected that low-income Black and brown students, low-income English learners, those students are not going to achieve, and that's been normalized. Can you imagine if high-income or middle-income white students, if the test scores came out and all of them, or a large percentage of them, were not proficient, were below basic or far below basic? You would see a storm upon the school board, and people, clamoring to get in to say, you got to do something about this. But when those scores come out and it's Black and brown students, that doesn't happen. We have normalized that, and which is why I absolutely love the work of NCUST, because it says our work is to unnormalize that, to make sure that that is not expected. If anything, the opposite is expected. And we work with those schools where the opposite is expected, and then we make that happen for kids and families, or work with schools to make that happen for kids and families.
So I have a thought that I just came to my mind right now when you said this has been normalized, and my wondering is, has it ever been abnormal?
I wish I could say it has been abnormal, but it absolutely hasn't. And and here's the other part of that, though, is we know what skills it takes to educate all students at high levels. So we know the skills. The question is, do we have the will to do it? And do we have the will to do it for all students? And over and over, we see that hasn't happened.
Well, I have another question for you. Tell us about the book, Teaching Practices in America's Best Urban Schools, and what you've learned. I know that as a superintendent of San Francisco, that had to be a very challenging role that you played in education. I probably don't need to say any more about that, but but the bottom line is, the teaching practices, what in your opinion lines up with what you saw as a superintendent with our books that we use in NCUST and the research that we found in NCUST about those 8 practices that really make a difference? Talk to us about that.
Yes, this is what I just talked about, is knowing what the skills are, like knowing it's important to focus on mastery. That's one of the 8. Or knowing that it's important to make sure students are in spots where they are in places where they are where they know it's a caring environment, or know that there's clarity in the lessons. All those 8 practices, when you look at them, they're what we know. If you look at it, and the sad things is that it happens in some places and not other places in a system, or in a school. It happens in a few classrooms, but not all classrooms. So the real question, and this is what I learned over the last few years, is how do you make that happen at scale in a large system, or even for a principal, how do you make it happen at scale in all of your classrooms? I think that in looking through them, I knew over time that those were the skills, but hadn't put it all together in the way the teaching practices book from NCUST does. And so once you see those, it basically is like, duh, those are skills. And as you walk through, you say, yes, this is exactly. And that's the thing. You'll see it in certain places or in small doses in certain schools or in certain classrooms. But put all together and that's the question. How do you make all of those happen at scale? And the real truth of the matter is you have to be very systematic about it. And that's what I've learned over the last few years, is that you have to be very systematic about making sure everyone knows that this is what we're about, and this is where we're aiming for, to have all of these 8 practices throughout our system. And then you're not going to do that instantly. It's going to take time, and it's going to take effort, and it's going to take diligence to make sure this is happening in the ways that you want it to happen. And then you actually have to keep walking through and going through classrooms and going through schools and actually measuring what you say you want to put in place.
Yeah, I'm resonating with the fact that you're talking about systems. And one of the books that really impacted my thinking and my work as a leader was The Fifth Discipline of Peter Senge. And after I read that and saw, these are the systems or systems thinking that cause businesses to either succeed or to fail, I said, I wonder if they have something for schools. And sure enough, there was a book called Schools That Learned that I used as a guide to open a brand new school. And it talks about systems thinking, making sure that everything in the system is working together, kind of like the human body, that we all have these different parts, but without certain parts of the body, you're not able to function at the highest level that you could function. And so our schools are like a body, and we have to make sure that everyone in that system is capable of doing the work so that we can make sure our students have the best possible education.
Yep, absolutely.
Do you have a specific event or something that occurred in your educational experience that affected what you believe and how you behave?
Yes, absolutely. There were, I'd say, 2 big events that happened. The first one I talked briefly about earlier, where my mother came into the school system. So she had said over and over, you are going to go to college. And then she always added, we don't know how we're going to pay for it, but you're going to go. So she didn't, my parents didn't save bonds or put money away. So I actually say we used the Visa scholarship, which means we just ran up a Visa credit card and then hopefully could open another one and ran up another Visa credit.
Oh, my goodness.
So still a lot of loans being paid off right now. But the event that happened was she came into the school. Basically, I was a 10th grader at McAteer High in San Francisco, and she said, is he in college going courses? Someone looked at this little African-American 10th grader and decided to put me not in college going courses. So on a Tuesday in October of my sophomore year, I was in classes with students who looked just like me. And on Wednesday, I was in classes with students who looked nothing like me, because I was switched out of the non-college going courses into college going courses. And so that event, if my mother had not come up to the school that day, I have no doubt that we would not be having this conversation right now. I wouldn't have been in the positions that I've been in, but it was because she was dedicated, and she knew that for an African-American woman, that you just cannot trust the system to do what it's supposed to do, which is, a sad commentary on our system. So that was one event that really happened. And it really formed in me the importance of us making sure students have the skills that they need to go on and live the lives that can actually impact either a community or even a city, or in my case, I ended up being a superintendent and the leader of education in so many cities. The second event was when I first got into after graduating from San Francisco State, I started teaching at a school called George Washington Carver School. The school was 100% low income and 100% African American. And we had the highest rate of achievement in the entire city. And it was really because we had a leader. Her name was Louise C. Jones. And the tenets she pushed into us and got us to believe in, because she was a fantastic leader, was that all children can learn, all children want to learn, and we as the adults in the system have the responsibility for making that happen. So we're not going to use poverty as an excuse. We're not going to use race as an excuse. We're not going to use parents working and not being available as an excuse. We have these students for 6.5 hours every day, and it's our responsibility to make sure they have the skills that they need. And those tenets I've carried through from my first day of teaching till now, the work and through all of my principalships and all of my superintendencies, now into the work with NCUST. It really is about the adults in the system and us having the responsibility to make sure kids have the skills that they need so that they can live successful lives.
You know, one of the things that you said that caused me to think about another book I read that really had an impact on me is you said all students want to learn. We don't usually say that in education. Usually what we say is all students can learn, but we don't say all students want to learn. And I appreciate you saying that because the book that I read years ago was called The Myth of Laziness. And one of the very first things in that book talks about how every human being is born with a desire to be productive. So when we get to the point where we don't want to be productive, we have to look at what are the factors that are causing us not to want something that is a desire that we all have innately. So I appreciate you saying that because that I will use that myself. All children, all people want to learn. What do we do to drive that want out of them?
I agree, and that's what's driven me in working with teams and working with schools all this time is those three tenets, and you really just figuring out as a team at each of those schools or each of the districts how we can move forward to make sure these kids get the skills that they need.
So what book are you going to write that lets us all in on this secret?
Right now, just excited about this work.
Add that to your extensive list of. Just in conclusion, I just want to find out, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know about the work that you do or anything else that we should know about you, Dr. Matthews?
Yes. The one thing I will say is, as I said, I was in the profession, well, still am, but officially before retiring. And in 36 years, it was the last 2 that I really felt like everything gelled and it all made sense, even though little pieces had been together. And I don't say this lightly, and I'm not saying this just because I'm on this podcast, but it really was the work of NCUST, the work of Dr. Johnson in finding those best practices and really crystallizing it in a way that it all of a sudden it's like the Matrix. And really finally having the peel. I don't know if it's red or the blue one, but having the one.
We might not want to talk about pills.
But the piece that all made it make sense. And so, like I said, there were all these pieces over time. Like I knew it's important for teachers to be clear about what the objective of the lesson is. I knew it's clear to make kids feel cared for and valued. I knew all of this, but it wasn't all put together. And seeing it all put together really, really crystallized, I said, in the last 2 years. So the reason I bring this up is to say, if you're at the beginning of your career or even at the middle, both the leadership practices as well as the teaching practices in America's Best Schools, I would say would definitely benefit. And if I had one book that I wish I would have had 30 years ago, it would 2 books. It would have been those 2 books. And I don't say that because I'm on this podcast. I say that because I really believe that to be true.
Well, hopefully you'll write a book one day too and share some of your experiences that you've shared with us today. So I want to thank you, Dr. Matthews, for taking time out of your schedule to be on this podcast. I want to remind our listeners once again that the National Center for Urban Schools Transformation, also known as NCUST, was founded in 2005 to help districts and their partners transform schools into places where all students achieve academic proficiency, evidence of love of learning, and graduate well prepared to succeed in post-secondary education, the workplace, and more importantly, their communities. We will broadcast a new episode of this podcast at the beginning of each month. You can subscribe to the NCUST Review on Spotify. Once again, we want to thank you for listening to this episode of the NCUST Review, What Great Schools Do.